Welcome back. You're watching Business Plus. As a part of our ongoing coverage of budget for Bharat, we are discussing India's need to realize its dream of $30 trillion economy by 2047. Now, in the run-up to budget of 2024, we discuss sectors that will drive growth, and no discussion is complete without the mention of the auto industry. In the last budget, the government focused on green and clean mobility. Funds were allocated for replacing government vehicles. Customs duty exemptions were extended to import of capital goods and machinery required to manufacture lithium-ion cells for batteries used in electric vehicles. For this year, the auto sector is now poised to focus on the transition towards clean and clear mobility, with expectations grounded on updates around FAME 3 schemes, perhaps PLI SOPs and revision of the GST on entry-level two-wheelers. Will the interim budget further incentivize electric or hybrid vehicles and disincentivize diesel vehicles? Let's understand. Joining us is Shashank Srivastava, Senior Executive Officer, Marketing and Sales, Maruti Suzuki. Also with us is Vinay Raghunath. He's the EY India Consulting AMI leader. Also with me, Karthik Malhotra here in the studio. Hi, good afternoon, Karthik.
Hi, Shweta.
Let's quickly take this to Vinay first. He's here with us. Vinay, hi, good afternoon. Question that first comes to our mind when we talk about auto, and the theme perhaps that we've discussed through the year when it comes to 2023, is the transition towards green and clean mobility. India has a vision for 30% electric fleet by end of the decade. How close are we to realizing that dream, and what are we expecting as far as budget is concerned and the thrust towards clean mobility?
Good afternoon, and thanks for the question. The Indian government has been very upfront in the targets that it's taken in terms of electrification for 2030. Whilst there have been a number of initiatives that have been rolled out in the last couple of budgets, one has to make this point that India will continue in the short term to be a multi-fuel market, and the government will have to play the balancing act between all the powertrains and fuel types. However, the electric vehicle market did very well in 2023, registered a growth of nearly 46%, close to 1.5 million units across various segments. That still is a single-digit percentage of the total volume that India sold. And we have quite a bit of task ahead of us if we have to meet the 30% target that was laid out. And therefore, I see the next few budgets, including the current one, focusing on furthering this electrification goal through a number of initiatives, both in terms of supporting the reduction of cost of manufacture and also increasing adoption from a consumer perspective.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure if Shashank is with us right now. He's not with us just as yet. But Karthik, I think, staying on with the dream of electrification, an entire ecosystem needs to be built. And the government, in a way, has kick-started the need to build that ecosystem by not just reducing customs duty on lithium-ion and making lithium-ion batteries here in India, but also the invention, by the way, of sodium-ion batteries that India has been able to make in 2023. Perhaps some announcement to either reduce the customs duty on manufacturing of these batteries, but also generate more entrepreneurs, or perhaps thrust towards more entrepreneurship when it comes to developing these batteries and developing these solutions for EVs.
So Shweta, I think India will have to embark on a dual strategy right now, where at one level we will of course look at the multiple existing fuel types that are already there, which is petrol and diesel. I think whether by way of this budget or not, but disincentivizing diesel is going to be something that the government will continue to push for. Okay. I'm not sure if any major announcements will be made in the interim budget or not, but I think on the side of green and clean mobility, there are two very clear paths, and at some point in the future, perhaps not immediately, we'll have to choose what our focus area should be. Should we go 100% lock, stock and barrel behind electric mobility, or should hybrid find a more sort of organic mix in the clean energy fuel types that we want to pursue? So I think that is one clear direction which the government will have to subsequently take. Now, if it is the electric mobility route, then I think FAME 3, whether it gets announced at budget, before budget, post budget, we'll have to see what is kind of allocation that the government will want to do on the post-purchase utility of the charging infrastructures, for example, right? Or mobile electric highways as we speak of them. So I think that allocation should come through, and there should be some incentives for the private sector to invest in the charging ecosystem. And if we continue to take the hybrid and the EV route, then I think we will have to look at the technology that goes into producing the components for either.
All right, Shashank is with us. Shashank, we started this conversation without you, but we are essentially talking about what every automaker in the country would perhaps will be talking about if it's not doing so already, and that is the thrust towards electric mobility. On behalf of Maruti, and from what's come from Maruti's table so far, what sort of thrust does Maruti have in EVs or on EVs? What is in the pipeline as far as EVs is concerned? Would it be pure play electric vehicles? Would the thrust be towards perhaps hybrid vehicles as well?
Yeah, so we have mentioned this before, that we believe that in order to meet the emission norms, which has been set by the government, basically with respect to the carbon neutrality, the long-term carbon neutrality, those norms will have to be met by a mix of technologies, not necessarily pure EVs. So what you will see is a mix of technologies, including hybrids, plug-ins, including CNG, biogas, flex fuel, and a much more fuel-efficient gasoline vehicles. But really, there is a consensus in the industry that the EV, the long-term, the EVs will become mainstream. And the consensus which is not there is when it's going to happen. So the when is the question and not whether. So we believe at Maruti Suzuki by 2030, the EV penetration in India would be roughly around 20%, 18 to 20%. Maruti Suzuki's powertrain in 2030 would be roughly 15% EV, 25% hybrid, and the balance a mix of CNG, biogas, and flex fuels. And remember, I was just hearing the conversation that we believe hybrids are a route towards the greater electrification, because some of the components which hybrid technology uses is common with EVs. And the basic reason why EV penetration is not so high in India, is just around 2.2% this year, is because of the high cost of acquisition, largely because of battery prices. And battery prices can't come down unless localization happens.
All right, and to that regard, what are your expectations from the budget? What sort of hand-holding are you hoping Finance Minister will give you at this time? Although it's an interim budget, it's a vote on account, not so much. Not so much expected by the way of pomp and show, going forward.
So really, as you rightly said, it's an interim budget. It's a vote on account, so maybe large-scale changes may not happen. However, we do expect that, for the growth of the auto industry, and it's got a high correlation with the overall economic growth of the GDP per capita growth. In fact, there is a very high correlation of almost 0.983 R square factor for coefficient when you do a regression of the past data. So we expect that the government will continue the policy for economic growth, and that should actually help the auto industry. And that means as far as capital infrastructure development is concerned, capital expenditure is concerned, the government should go on, and also encouragement of private investments in capital expenditure. That's one. FAME 2 scheme, I think the FAME scheme should continue, including the PLI, which does encourage manufacturing. And finally, our wish list is, of course, that if something can be done for and I don't expect big changes in taxation, but I hope that something can be done for the fuel-efficient vehicles like CNG and hybrids. If there can be some sort of a support, that should help really the transition eventually to EVs in the long term.
So I agree, in fact, with what Shashank is saying, and by way of incentivizing individuals to purchase expensive electric vehicles, I think some sort of a continuity in policy, Shweta, would be required, where there is a direct income tax concession up to, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1.5 lakh rupees in the last budget which was announced, which in fact becomes your tax-free component if you go ahead and buy an electric vehicle. Should that get extended to hybrid vehicles as well? I think that is something that Finance Minister could consider in her budget.
All right. Vinay, is that your expectations as well? Because, overall thrust towards EVs is something that the government is looking looking to make. So question at this point in time is, to what extent will that thrust move and in what direction? Because over the year, there's also been conversations around Tesla's entry into India, Tesla's foray into India, and perhaps by the way of, import duty cut, there could be an announcement made propelling Tesla to make an entry into India to set up that $2 billion factory. That hasn't so much happened so far. So, as far as your overall impetus towards developing an EV ecosystem and continuity in policy and perhaps also incentivizing people to own an electric vehicles is concerned, what are your expectations?
I mean, I mirror some of the comments that Shashank made. I don't foresee significant changes on the tax side. Just last budget, for example, the government had increased custom duty by 10% to largely help localization of components. And unless there's a one-off event, some sort of a free trade agreement I don't foresee a significant quote on the tax side. However, when it comes to the corporate tax and the GST side, there could be small tweaks that the government could do. For long, the auto sector has been asking for a standardization of the GST. There's obviously an 18% and a 28% slab both at play. And a standardization of that has been an ask for a while. That could find mention. On the corporate tax side, some sort of support in terms of extending the date for start of manufacturing for those who availed the 15% tax regime for manufacturing by maybe a year or two could find mention in the budget. But beyond that, I don't see a significant mention as far as customs duty is concerned, since you mentioned Tesla.
And Vinay, what about the individual income tax? And there was a concession announced by way of individuals being able to receive that 1.5 lakh rupees worth of income tax rebate when it came to owning EVs. Do you think there should be continuity or expansion of that scheme?
No, I think what you said about extending that to other fuel types also, particularly hybrids, is something that's interesting for them to think about. But definitely continuation of that to increase adoption, drive lower cost of initial ownership is something that will help propel electrification. And just, I mean, from a consumer driver standpoint, also on the insurance and the interest rate side, often in some parts you see a significant difference between interest rates and insurance premiums of electric vehicles vis-a-vis ICE engines. Maybe there'll be some thought that the government will give to that angle too.
Shashank, do you think there is merit in the finance minister actually considering extending this scheme and this incentive by way of income tax rebate to hybrid vehicles? Or will the government actually stand up and say that no, it's pretty much the ICE-like technology, no additional lithium-ion batteries, and hence we don't want to incentivize it?
The technology is quite different from pure ICE, and I'm not talking here of mild hybrids, but of strong hybrids. And that's the technology that we are all referring to at the moment. And I do believe that the final goal is actually reduction of emission, and that comes from reduction in the increase in the fuel efficiency, not a reduction, an increase in fuel efficiency, which is allowed by CNG, which is a very clean fuel, and hybrid as well. And therefore, a differential of 5% duty on EVs and a 45% on hybrid seems to be too much, because then there is no differential duty between hybrid and the other forms of ICE or even diesels. So I think some sort of a relief is expected for the fuel efficient vehicles, because those are the ones which are reducing the emission. And the real target is not the promotion of EVs, but the promotion but the reduction of emissions. Right. And of course, in India, the electricity itself is produced by thermal means, more or less. Right. And that means that the tailpipe emission is the one which is seeing a reduction if EVs are adopted, not necessarily an overall reduction in the ecosystem. Right. And we have to therefore see the well-to-wheel emission. And in fact, people are saying we have to actually see cradle-to-grave emissions, which is from the point of time when cars are made to the final point of time when batteries are disposed of. Right. In any case, I think hybrids will help in increasing actually the localization for future electrification. of the auto industry.
All right. And do you suspect the FAME 3 announcement could be made on Budget Day on the 1st of February? And if so, should there be some allocation, some very, very focused allocation for four-wheelers, passenger vehicles, and not limited only to two-wheelers and commercial vehicles, as has been the case so far?
I think it would be done probably after the budget, not necessarily because those need not be part of the budget. There were some changes made very recently in the FAME 2 and the extension thereof because the entire amount wasn't really fully utilized. And therefore, I would expect if tinkering is done on that front or any major changes would happen after the budget, not necessarily in the interim budget.
All right, and since we are on cars and, you know, as a part of our ambitious stories to own a car, every family, every person I talk to these days is complaining of how expensive cars have become. And this is owing to the fact that the input cost has gone up. Shashank, are you expecting some sort of hand holding? It's an election year after all.
Well, I think what we say is the premiumization of the vehicles largely. You can see probably a more aspirational purchase rather than functional. And as far as functional purchase is concerned, people in that segment have been adversely affected because the prices have gone up faster than the income levels. In other words, the affordability factor has come down. And that's because of multiple reasons, including commodity prices increases and stringency on the regulatory front. But I guess going forward, and we have done some sort of research going forward, the affordability factor is probably going to increase if the trajectory of economic growth continues. The GDP per capita increases, income levels increase for this segment. Prices may not go up in the same range. And in that case, the affordability will increase. We do see sometime in the second half of 2026 a turnaround for the smaller cars as well. So yes, it does depend a lot on how economy shapes up, and I do expect the income levels now, even in the segments at the lower end, to increase than what they have done in the past few years.
I'm very glad to hear that there is an acceptance as far as affordability is concerned.
Yeah, but Vinay, you know, I'm sure Shashank is not going to like this question, so I'll not ask him. I'll rather ask you.
No, you can ask me. You can ask me.
But do you think, Vinay, there is a case for some sort of a windfall tax on auto companies making supernormal profits?
No, I think the auto companies after many years have had have had 4-5 quarters of a good run from a demand standpoint. However, the point that Shashank made about the input costs affecting the lower end of the price ladder is very valid. And hopefully over the next few years, we will see significant traction at that end of the price segment also. Incidentally, there is a prediction that over the next decade or so, we will see a tipping point in terms of GDP per capita in India, which will significantly accelerate car ownership as a per capita within the country. And hopefully that will play in well. And I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that the windfall profits are still lie in the years ahead, Shashank.
So Shashank didn't like the question. I'm sure he likes the answer.
No, I like the question because it gives me a chance to clarify that, you know, the very few companies, auto companies have made money. Actually, if you see over the years, some of the companies have actually gone out of the country, like Ford, GM, etc. And most companies don't make money except the top 5-6 companies. So really, a windfall tax, I think, is out of question. If you look at the overall industry, don't just look at Maruti's profits.
All right, Vinay, Shashank, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure listening to the two of you. Thank you for joining us on that very important story. We continue to track all the developments as far as run-up to Budget 2024 is concerned, the key pillars and the expectations only on News9. Thank you very much.